Air travel is often called the safest way to travel, but that doesn't mean it's free of shocking moments. Even the smoothest flights can take a sudden, dangerous turn. What if you're on a plane and suddenly the engines fail? The landing gear won't deploy, or worse, a missile strikes. Today, we're diving into 9 of the most unbelievable emergency landings in aviation history. Stick around, because number 4 is one you won't believe, and it's my personal favorite.
Mayday, Mayday, Paca 110. We lost an engine.
I understand you have lost an engine, is that correct?
Both engines, sir. Both engines.
Understand both engines.
I'm declaring an emergency here. I don't have any engines, okay? Any engines. We glide them down, okay?
Understand you're gliding down, Taco 110, roger.
I don't think that I will make it. So I guess we have to go down. We had to go down.
On May 24th, 1988, TACA Flight 110 was headed to New Orleans when Mother Nature threw a tantrum. Severe storms knocked out both engines of the Boeing 737. The engines flamed out due to water ingestion, leaving the plane powerless at 16,500 feet. Captain Carlos Dardano, with no engine thrust and limited options, scanned the ground for a lifeline. He spotted a narrow grass levee running along a canal and decided to make it their impromptu runway. The levee not only kept the plane from sinking, but also allowed Captain Dardano to land without damaging the aircraft or losing a single life. Yes, every single passenger and crew member walked away unharmed. But what caused the engines to fail in the first place? The storm's intensity overwhelmed the engine's drainage systems, causing them to stall. This led Boeing's engineers to rethink their designs, ensuring future models could withstand extreme weather conditions. June 10, 1990 was a day no one on board British Airways Flight 5390 would forget.
Pilot and his magnificent crew. That's how British Airways Captain Timothy Lancaster described his co-pilot and flight attendants today. They pulled off a miracle in midair yesterday. The BAC 111 was flying at 23,000 feet when a cockpit windshield next to the captain was blown out.
At 23,000 feet, disaster struck in the most dramatic fashion imaginable. A poorly secured cockpit windscreen panel detached, blasting Captain Tim Lancaster halfway out of the plane. Yes, halfway out. Explosive decompression in the cockpit sucked Lancaster's upper body out of the aircraft, leaving his legs pinned inside while the wind flattened his torso against the fuselage. The cabin crew acted with lightning speed, grabbing his legs to prevent him from being ejected entirely. Meanwhile, co-pilot Alistair Atchison took control. With the cockpit door blown open and deafening wind roaring, he initiated an emergency descent. For nearly 20 minutes, the cabin crew clung to Lancaster, and Atchison guided the plane to a safe landing in Southampton, saving all 87 people on board. So, what caused this nightmare? Investigators found that the bolts securing the windscreen had been replaced with ones too small for the frame, a tiny oversight with massive consequences. Miraculously, Lancaster survived with frostbite, a few broken bones, and a story for the ages. Fun fact, he was back in the cockpit within 5 months. When it comes to impossible landings, United Airlines Flight 232 stands as one of the most tragic yet miraculous examples. On July 19, 1989, this DC-10 was en route from Denver to Chicago when its tail engine's fan disc exploded at 37,000 feet. The shrapnel tore through the hydraulic systems, leaving the aircraft with no control over pitch, roll, or yaw. Essentially, the plane was a 200-ton brick falling from the sky. Captain Al Haynes and his team discovered they could steer the aircraft using differential thrust, adjusting the remaining engine's power to control the plane. It was crude, exhausting, and required teamwork like no other. The crew directed the plane towards Sioux Gateway Airport. The landing was rough. The aircraft cartwheeled on impact and burst into flames. Tragically, 112 lives were lost, but 184 survived, a miracle given the circumstances. This crash forever changed aviation safety. It highlighted the importance of crew resource management, also known as CRM, a training system now used worldwide to ensure no one person shoulders the burden during a crisis. On November 4, 2010, Qantas Flight 32, a massive Airbus A380 carrying 469 passengers and crew, departed from Singapore's Changi Airport en route to Sydney. Just 4 minutes into the flight, one of the 4 Rolls-Royce Trent 900 engines exploded. The blast ripped through the wing, triggering failures across 21 key systems. Hydraulics, fuel pumps, electronics. Everything seemed to be breaking down. Inside the cockpit, Captain Richard de Crepigny and his crew faced over 50 warning messages at once. The next 2 hours were a masterclass in crisis management. The crew methodically prioritized each failure, stabilizing the aircraft and dumping excess fuel to lighten the load. With one engine completely inoperable and significant damage to others, they turned the plane back to Singapore. De Crepigny landed the plane smoothly, even as the brakes overheated and one engine refused to shut down. Not a single passenger was injured, a staggering achievement given the extent of the damage. Post-landing, investigators traced the engine explosion to a defective oil pipe. November 1, 2011 was a day that Warsaw's Chopin Airport would never forget. LOT Polish Airlines Flight 16, a Boeing 767 carrying 231 passengers and crew, was on its way from Newark to Warsaw when things went south. As the plane approached its destination, the crew discovered the landing gear wouldn't deploy. Despite multiple attempts to override the system, the hydraulic system controlling it was completely unresponsive. Captain Thaddeus Rona knew they had no choice but to attempt a belly landing, a maneuver that requires perfect execution to avoid catastrophe. Rona executed it flawlessly, aligning the aircraft perfectly for a smooth touchdown on its belly. Not a single spark or flame erupted. The runway, lined with fire-retardant foam as a precaution, remained unused. All 231 passengers walked away unharmed. So, what went wrong? A hydraulic fluid leak had rendered the landing gear system useless. Captain Rona later admitted that his greatest priority during those moments wasn't his reputation, or even the aircraft. It was the lives of everyone on board. If you think gliding is reserved for lightweight planes, think again. On August 24, 2001, Air Transat Flight 236, an Airbus A330 carrying 306 passengers and crew, achieved the unthinkable. It glided nearly 120 kilometers, or about 75 miles, across the Atlantic Ocean after running out of fuel. The journey began in Toronto, bound for Lisbon. About halfway across the ocean, the crew noticed an imbalance in the fuel levels between the 2 engines. Believing it to be a minor transfer issue, they continued flying. What they didn't realize was that a small fuel line had been damaged during maintenance, creating a massive leak. By the time they realized the gravity of the situation, it was too late. Both engines flamed out at 39,000 feet, leaving the plane powerless. Captain Robert Pichet and First Officer Dirk de Jager sprang into action. With no engine thrust and limited options, they calculated that their only hope was to reach Lodges Air Base in the Azores. Using the plane's altitude and airspeed, Pichet executed a controlled glide. For 19 agonizing minutes, passengers sat in eerie silence as the aircraft coasted toward the tiny island runway. As they approached, the crew performed a near-perfect emergency landing, touching down with such accuracy that only a few passengers suffered minor injuries during their rapid deceleration. The investigation revealed that the damaged fuel line, coupled with poor communication between maintenance teams, had led to the fuel leak. This flight is remembered as one of the greatest examples of calm under pressure. Mechanical failures and human errors have dominated our list so far, but on November 22, 2003, DHL Flight 611 faced an entirely different kind of threat, a surface-to-air missile. The Airbus A300 was on a routine cargo flight out of Baghdad when it was struck by a missile shortly after takeoff. The missile exploded on the left wing, completely disabling the aircraft's hydraulic systems and punching a hole in the wing itself. With no hydraulics, the plane effectively lost all traditional means of control, leaving the pilots, Captain Eric Janot and First Officer Steve Mickelson, in an unimaginable situation. How do you land a plane without controls? The crew had to innovate on the fly, literally. Using nothing but engine thrust, they managed to steer the plane. Increasing power to one engine caused the plane to turn in that direction, while reducing thrust on the other helped stabilize it. Sure, it wasn't a perfect solution, but it was their only option. The real test came during the landing. With no ability to flare, also known as lifting the nose, or control the descent rate, the pilots had to bring the A300 down as gently as possible using sheer intuition. Against all odds, they landed safely at Baghdad International Airport, skidding to a halt on the runway. Both pilots walked away safely, along with the crew. January 15, 2009 is a famous day in the history of aviation, thanks to an extraordinary water landing that has been immortalized as the Miracle on the Hudson. U.S. Airways Flight 1549, an Airbus A320 carrying 155 people, had just taken off from New York's LaGuardia Airport, heading to Charlotte, North Carolina. Barely 3 minutes into the flight, a flock of Canadian geese collided with the aircraft, disabling both engines. The plane, now a powerless glider, was over one of the busiest urban areas in the world. Captain Chesley, Sully Sullenberger, and his first officer Jeffrey Skiles had seconds to decide their next move. Turning back to LaGuardia wasn't feasible. They simply didn't have the altitude or thrust. Nearby Teterboro Airport was another option, but the risk of crashing into densely populated areas was too high. Sully's decision? The Hudson River. Executing a water landing, known as ditching, is one of the most difficult maneuvers in aviation. We all know aircraft aren't designed to float, and even the slightest miscalculation can result in disaster. Yet Sully guided the Airbus to a textbook-perfect touchdown on the icy river. The plane remained intact, and all 155 passengers standing on the wings as ferries rushed to their rescue were saved. Sully's actions turned what could have been one of aviation's greatest tragedies into one of its most celebrated moments. The final story on our list is a mix of courage, tragedy, and lessons. On November 23, 1996, Ethiopian Airlines Flight 961, a Boeing 767 flying from Addis Ababa to Nairobi, was hijacked by 3 men demanding to be flown to Australia. Their demands were not only unreasonable, but physically impossible. The plane simply didn't have enough fuel to make such a journey. The hijackers ignored the pleas of Captain Leo Abade, who tried to explain the dire fuel situation. Forced to continue flying until the tanks ran dry, the aircraft eventually lost power over the Indian Ocean near the Comoros Islands. With no engines and water rapidly approaching, Captain Abade made a desperate attempt to ditch the plane on the ocean surface. Water landings are rare and dangerous, especially in such uncontrolled circumstances. Abade tried to level the aircraft as much as possible, but just before impact, one wing dipped and struck the water, causing the plane to cartwheel and break apart. Out of the 175 people on board, only 50 survived. The majority of fatalities were attributed to passengers inflating their life vests inside the cabin, trapping them as water rushed in. This incident became a watershed moment for aviation security. It led to stronger anti-hijacking measures and significant changes in passenger safety briefings, including clear instructions about when to inflate life vests during a water evacuation. While the loss of life was devastating, the survivors owed their lives to a captain who fought until the very last moment to save his passengers. And that's a wrap. So, which of these stories left you speechless? Did we miss a legendary landing you think deserves to be on this list? Drop your comments below. Before you go, don't forget to check out my recent video, Planes vs. Drones, The Growing Problem. Keep flying high with us, hit subscribe, ring the bell, and be ready for more stories that defy the skies.